absolutely fine. And that's the recording started. That's great. But thank you so much for joining us today. This is one of our anti-stigma sessions here at CME, and this session is focused on having an anti-stigma approach to workplace mental health inclusion. And I'm Bryony, I'm the project officer for workplaces at CME. So my role is really supporting workplaces engaged with us to find out what they're doing, what the main challenges are when it comes to creating a stigma-free work environment, and what we can do to support organisations in that journey of having a really inclusive culture where people can speak openly about mental health within their workplace. So this session will focus on what stigma is, how it's experienced in the workplace, and then what you can do about it, what you can do to create an environment where people do feel more comfortable disclosing that they know they're going to be supported by their workplace, and how to create an environment where people feel really welcomed when they're experiencing mental illness or mental health struggles within their life, how they can then be supported by their workplace through that. So that's what will be covered in today's session. Like I said, if at any point you have questions, feel free to pop them into the chat. Don't feel like you need to wait for me to ask if anyone has any. And if at any point you would like me to repeat anything or you don't hear something clearly, please feel free to ask that. There's no issues with asking me to repeat something because I can speak quite quickly. And so I'll get started today. We've just got some housekeeping rules for the session. So the first thing is that we have the safer space agreement and give a content warning. Obviously, we'll be speaking about mental health today and mental illness. We might touch on suicidal ideation or experiences of discrimination in relation to mental health. If that's particularly a motive for anyone or you would like support, feel free to kind of take a moment from the session and come back when you're ready, or if you need to leave entirely, that is okay. If you would like any links to support services or you're looking for support afterwards, please send us an email. My email will be at the end of the session, and we can then pop in support services that might be useful for you for reaching out. So that's the kind of content warning of the session. We also have our safer space agreement. So just within this space, if you do want to share anything about your own workplace or your own workplace experience, feel free to only share information that is yours to share and that you're comfortable sharing. So take time out if you need to. Don't feel pressure to share anything personal if you don't want to. And obviously, if you do want to share anything personal, then that is absolutely fine. Everyone has different views and experiences on mental health and has their own personal attachment to it as well. So please treat others how you'd like to be treated within the session, and respect everyone's different views whilst we're in this space. And lastly, confidentiality. Scotland can feel like a big place, but I've found that it's actually very small in terms of people knowing each other. So if you are sharing anything about your life or about someone else's life, then please just say like a person or someone I work with rather than using any identifying information if you are wanting to share any feedback. So that's some housekeeping rules for today's session. Does anyone have any objections or questions about this, or are you happy to move on to the content? Seen some nodding, so that's absolutely fine. If anyone does have any objections to the housekeeping rules, then feel free to pop that into the chat as well. And we can have a discussion about that, but that's just some rules to keep people safe. So in case this is your first time hearing about CME through this session, I just wanted to explain a little bit about who CME are. So CME are Scotland's national programme for tackling mental health, stigma and discrimination. And we really focus on the goal of creating a Scotland where people can get the right help at the right time, expect recovery and fully enjoy their rights free from stigma and discrimination. And we we don't have any services in terms of support. We have our managing partner, SAMH, or Scottish Action for Mental Health, who have some great services across Scotland to support people with their mental health. What we really focus on as a programme is our change in behaviour, culture and systems. So why does stigma come about? Why do people face mental health discrimination? How can we reduce it and what can we do about it? And we really want to ensure that people with experience of mental health problems or mental illness are respected, valued, and empowered to achieve the outcomes that are important to them. And in my role, it's specifically looking at ensuring that workplaces are set up and are able to support people with mental illness within the workplace and ensure that they have a positive experience within employment rather than a negative one. That is who we are as an organisation. If anyone wants to find out more, we'll have loads of links at the end of the session about where you can get further resources and support, and where you can find out a bit more about the work that we do. So This session is about stigma, it's about anti-stigma approach. So I'll start off with defining what do we mean by stigma and discrimination. And then I'll go into chatting a little bit about how does stigma affect people within the workplace. So what are people's experiences of stigma? How does it affect them? And why is it important to have an anti-stigma approach within your organization? So first of all, when we talk about stigma, we're talking about a social process that involves damaging labelings and stereotyping or exclusion of individuals or groups based on perceived differences that deviate from dominant social norms. And that is just an academic way of kind of saying when someone kind of deviates from what we expect from people, and I'd say that the expectation generally within Scotland is that base level of coping, people then face stigma around about that. So whether that be someone who is maybe having panic attacks, which kind of people may not have encountered before, or someone who's really struggling with different aspects of their mental illness and are struggling to kind of cope and keep that kind of normal day-to-day activity going, that is when people face quite a bit of stigma around about mental illness. And stigma can be faced through multiple different characteristics. So kind of ableism, sexism, homophobia, all of those things are attached with stigma and discrimination. But we are specifically looking at discrimination and stigma around mental illness and mental illness as a disability under the Equality Act. And then discrimination is part of that. So it's part of stigma. It's where the stigma and biases that people have then become action. So it's inequitable or prejudicial treatment of individuals or groups based on their stigmatized identities. And it can be very intentional. So we're thinking about like news headlines, political speeches that are intentional and that have been planned that may have stigmatizing language in it. That is very intentional stigma. However, there's also often unintentional, and we're finding more in workplaces than in education. The stigma that people are facing is often unintentional, but still very impactful on their lives. And then lastly, we will talk a bit about intersectional stigma. So this is where people face multiple different forms of stigma that shape their lived experiences and opportunities of groups who are marginalized and create distinct disadvantages which cannot be stood in isolation from each other. And a simple way of kind of understanding that is that if someone's experiencing stigma around about neurodiversity, then ultimately that kind of isolation of lack of understanding will then have an impact on their mental health. And then they may experience stigma around about their mental health as well. Those things are not caused by each other, but they're both experienced by one individual. And the same goes for stigma around about sexuality, for example. Someone may face homophobia within a workplace, and that ultimately has an impact on their sense of belonging, their ability to speak openly, their ability to bring themselves to work, which then has an impact on mental health. So these things cannot be understood in isolation from each other. Protected characteristics affect people intersectionally and all at one time. So when you're thinking about stigma and you're thinking about stigma in relation to mental illness, I would also encourage you to be thinking about, well, how do we challenge other forms of stigma within our organization in addition to stigma around mental illness? Because they are all concurrent and they all have an impact on people as an individual. So that's our kind of formalized definitions before I get into the stats around about what people experience in terms of stigma within the workplace. Um, if at any point you have questions, like I said, please feel free to pop them into the chat because there's a lot of different phrases that we'll be using throughout this. So feel free to ask for any clarification or ask any questions about that. But I'll move on to what people experience. So we did a Scottish mental illness stigma study in September of 2022, where we asked people around Scotland who I self-identify as having long-term or complex mental illness, as what did you experience in terms of stigma? Have you experienced stigma? And where has it been most impactful on your life? So whilst employment was the sixth most frequently experienced area of mental health stigma, and more occurred more often in mental health care, healthcare, and in social media or relationships that people had, it was the second most impactful area. So although it may happen less frequently than these other areas, it's an area that has a huge impact on our lives. And if people are working full time, I think on average, people spend a third of their life in work and a third of their life sleeping. So therefore, you have a third of your life outside of work. So employment has a huge impact on your life. It has a huge impact on kind of your finances, your day-to-day ability, abilities, your housing, all of those sorts of things are impacted by your employment. So when you're facing stigma within that setting or facing discrimination within that setting, and you're not able to disclose how you're feeling, and you're therefore not able to access support for what you're experiencing in terms of mental illness, that has a huge impact on people's lives. So it's really about thinking about, well, how do we reduce that impact? How do we reduce what's occurring in terms of stigma as well? And ultimately, because of stigma, people had three experiences of experiencing the stigma itself and then anticipating future stigma. So when they will go into different workplaces or have form new relationships or meet new colleagues, anticipating that if they're open about mental health, they will face new forms of stigma as well, even if it hasn't occurred yet. And then withdrawal, because of that experience and that anticipation, withdrawing from opportunities or withdrawing from social aspects of work out of fear of being found out about mental illness or fear of facing further discrimination or stigma. These were some of the stats that came out of that survey, and we had roughly around about 2,000 respondents that self-identified as having long-term or complex mental illness around Scotland. And this is what their experience was. So 57% said that they had been unfairly denied employment opportunities and believed that was due to stigma around about being open about their mental illness. And 77% that they'd been treated unfairly at their place of work following talking about mental illness. And one quote from one of the respondents had said, "My manager had been very judgmental about one of our sales assistants' mental health struggles, and as a result, I haven't told anyone about my symptoms or specific diagnosis." So that's someone who's not experienced the stigma themselves, but they've heard their manager speaking about other people with mental illness in a very stigmatizing way, and that's prevented them from coming forward or seeking support about their specific symptoms or diagnosis. And there was that anticipation as well. So 74% of respondents said that they go into work expecting to be treated unfairly if they disclose their mental illness. And 48% had said that they expect to be unfairly asked to leave their place of work due to symptoms around their mental illness or support needed around mental illness. So it has a huge impact as well as this experiencing the stigma is that feeling of I'm going into work and I'm going to be asked to leave. It creates a huge sense of anxiety and it doesn't contribute to that sense of belonging or being valued at a workplace if you're going in thinking, if I'm open about this or if I speak about my mental illness, I'm going to be asked to leave. And that's a very big pressure to have on someone and will ultimately stop people seeking support, which is showcased by this fact that 75% of respondents said that they'd stopped themselves from discussing their mental illness and needs at work because of that fear of future stigmatization. And 45% of respondents had said that they'd resigned or left employment before they felt ready to because of stigmatizing experiences that they had had. So all of this ultimately has a huge impact on people's lives. And we think a lot about employability and making sure people are thriving at work. Addressing stigma is part of that. And you can have amazing support services. You can have mental health first aiders, counselling within your workplace. You can have all of these methods to really support people when they disclose a mental health condition. But if you do not have the environment because where people can openly say, I need to go to an appointment with a therapist, or I need to go to an appointment around about mental health, or I'm struggling with my mental health. If you don't have that environment, you'll feel safe to disclose and know that they will be supported. They will not access that support. So you can have really good support services. But if you don't think about the stigma within your workplace, how comfortable people feel coming forward, how normalized conversations about mental health are within your workplace, then ultimately those services are not going to be utilized in the way that they could be because of that fear. And Charlene has popped in the chat, I've had clients that use their own annual leave to go to mental health appointments because of that fear, which is a very common experience. If someone says, well, I don't want to disclose to my manager that I'm going to like a psychiatrist appointment or I'm going to a therapy appointment, whatever it may be, then using annual leave or sick leave to go to those appointments because they don't want to disclose that. Again, it puts an additional barrier in place for that person to really thrive at work and to get that support. So it's thinking about the flexibility as well, what support you have within your workplace, but also what you can do to create an environment where people feel safe to disclose. And we'll speak quite a bit about that throughout the rest of the session as well. And in terms of terms and language, what do we mean by stigmatizing language? We often, from the Scottish mental illness study, this is what people had said they'd experienced, the stigmatizing terms that were used against them. So if anyone's taking anything from this session, it would be to really avoid using those terms in the first place and also feeling more comfortable challenging those terms if you hear other people using them about colleagues or about employees that experience mental illness. So the stigmatizing terms that were flagged through the Scottish mental illness study was ignorant or not intelligent or lazy, which really undermined people's sense of worthiness. And it put that expectations that you constantly have to be productive, that you constantly have to be performing, no matter what your mental illness is, or no matter your kind of how your mental health is, that you have to be performing 110% all the time, which isn't realistic for anyone, but particularly for people who experience mental illness or other disabilities such as chronic illness. That is an unrealistic expectation for anyone, but particularly when you have those additional experiences. Using terms like that really undermine people's sense of worth and sense of value within organization. Attention seeking and manipulative were terms that came up within, particularly for young people as well, had flagged that those are terms that were used. And I think that's one infantilizing, but it invalidates people's understanding of their mental illness. If they're coming forward about their mental illness, it shouldn't ever be viewed as attention seeking because they're doing the thing that we actually want people to do, which is being honest, letting people know what they need. So don't invalidate that experience in any way, because it takes away their agency and it invalidates what they're experiencing, particularly when they've taken the step to be open about it. So really saying, thank you for being open about that. What support do you need? Rather than using any of these stigmatizing terms. And then lastly, the other terms that came across as being really stigmatizing from within the study that people had experienced was dangerous, deranged, chaotic, or unstable, or hostile or non-compliant. And last term that was flagged for people is hysterical. And that term is not only stigmatizing, it's also incredibly misogynistic because it's almost exclusively used towards women. And hysteria as a diagnosis, which is no longer a valid diagnosis, but in the past, has only ever been used towards women. So it's stigmatizing in itself, saying that someone's hysterical because they have mental illness or because they have mental health needs. But it's also a term that is largely weighted towards one gender as well. And all of these terms create a fear of people with mental illness. It creates the impression that they're out with control, which is not the case at all. It's the fact that people really need support and that they need those steps to be put in place to support them to make sure that they have those coping strategies, they have the right support in place, and that they are speaking to someone about their mental illness as well. And because we spend so much time at work and a lot of our lives at work, when someone comes forward about their mental illness at work, when they do feel able to disclose, that might be the first time they've spoken to anyone about their mental illness. So it's really important to create an environment where you're validating what they're experiencing, that you're using positive language about mental health, that you're leading with curiosity. You're saying, okay, well, how does that affect you? What support do you need? In an ideal world, what could we do in terms of reasonable adjustments? And we can have a discussion about if those are reasonable and what we can do to navigate that. And who else do you need to tell to make sure those points are that support is in place? So leading with that curiosity and questioning, not making your own assumptions about what they might be experiencing. So you might have, for example, a friend or a family member who's experienced depression. That doesn't mean the person that's just disclosed to you is going to experiencing it in the same way. So saying, oh, well, a person I know did this, that would help. It might invalidate what that person's experience because they might experience things very differently. So it's important just to be led with curiosity about, well, what are you experiencing? What support do you need? What can we do? Rather than making assumptions, either positive assumptions in the sense of we'll put all this support in place and trying to kind of rectify the situation without asking them if that's what they want or if that's what they need or if that's what would be helpful for them, but also in a negative way of assuming that they are no longer capable of doing parts of their role without, again, asking them or testing things or seeing what works for them. So just avoid making assumptions, be led by the person and have conversations about reasonable adjustments and what they need. Be a conversation rather than being dictated in any way of this is what we're going to do. It should be a back and forth in terms of what do you need, what can we do, and kind of navigate through your organization of what's possible, because not everything that would be helpful might be possible within your organization, but it's about navigating through that, about what is possible, what can we do, rather than making any assumptions about their capabilities or what they need. So, if there's anything to take from that, is avoid these terms, challenge these terms when you hear them from other people, and be led by curiosity when you're having conversations about mental health with people within the workplace and in your lives as well. Because ultimately, the impact of stigma and discrimination is that people who have faced stigma and discrimination are less likely to seek support from mental health services externally as well as internally. So, if you've experienced stigma, they're less likely to access AAP programs or in work counselling or occupational therapy, but also external services that might be able to support them out with the workplace as well. And people who have faced stigma often discuss not wanting to disclose their mental illness to friends or family member because of stigma that they faced elsewhere, whether that be in a workplace. Um, and people who have faced stigma and discrimination are less likely to reach out for support before reaching a crisis point as well. So getting to a crisis point before reaching out for that support. And it can become really internalized when people experience self stigma. So they start to believe the terms that other people have used about them or the media use about them, which has a severe impact on their own self worth and ability to believe in themselves about what they can achieve. But despite this proven impact, we found that many organizations, when they have a mental health inclusion or a mental health strategy within the organization, don't have any mention of how they're reducing the stigma or how they're reducing discrimination. It's focused on mental health first aid, which is brilliant, or assist, which is brilliant. Again, all these trainings are brilliant. But what are you doing about the stigma? So thinking about, does your mental health inclusion plan have that? Does it have mention of stigma? And what can you do? And Keely, you've popped in a question there, but how can you effectively give an example of how to challenge this effectively without causing problems for yourself? And I think challenging stigma is hard, particularly if there's a hierarchy within your organization. That can be very, very difficult. An appropriate way of kind of challenging someone is, well, what did you mean by that? So you're not accusing them of being discriminatory, you're not accusing them of anything, it's not combative. But if they say a stigmatizing term, really questioning, well, what did you mean by that? What did you mean when you said that? To get them explain a little further of what their thought process is. And you can then say, okay, well, looking at it differently, that person might need support. And I had a situation recently where I was delivering a session. I was particularly around young people in education, and someone had said, "Oh, well, what do you do when like young people pull the mental health card in the run up to exams?" And I'd kind of mentally said, "Okay, well, that's quite a stigmatizing statement in itself," but I didn't say that because of the combative nature. I'd said, "Okay, well, I hear what you're saying, but mental health at any point should be taken seriously, regardless of the timing, whether that be at the start of the year or towards exams, wherever it may be. Because although examinations are our stress point for everyone, it can be a real trigger point for people that have longer term mental illness. So it's about not invalidating their experience because it can be a trigger for people. Or it can be, if they don't get support in that instance, it's actually a cause of longer term issues. And we had that conversation and they were fairly receptive to that. But it was without saying, well, you're being really stigmatizing, you're saying something wrong. It's like, well, how do we look at that differently? And actually, how do we not invalidate that person's experience? So being quite gentle with language so that people are on side in terms of understanding. I like the looking at it differently, that what that person might need. Yeah, definitely. So try and not use any accusatory language, even when someone is being quite stigmatizing, but saying, well, what do you mean by that? How could that be viewed differently? And giving some real life experience in terms of, okay, well, this is what people experience, or here's a website to find out more about what people experience that might be useful for you to find out, what the realities are for people that experience mental illness. So you can direct them to further guidance as well. But that's a bit about what stigma is, how it impacts people within the workplace. Does anyone have any questions at this point before we move on to like what can we do about it? Yeah. Sometimes it is just about lack of education around it. Employers don't realize what support they can get. And there's loads of organizations out there that are looking to offer support for people with disabilities, which include mental illness as well. And that can offer that guidance as well about what's best practice. Paul, you've got your hand up.
Well, I must admit, I've never heard such an articulate way of being able to describe what stigma is. I did a petition at the Scottish Parliament a number of years ago to help a charity get additional funding for supporting people who had child abuse problems. Now, as soon as you mention the term child abuse, bang, the wall goes up. It doesn't matter whether the person's a professional or whether it's a non-professional. No, we don't talk about it. And there are many people who go to work who have, unfortunately, that kind of a taboo experience. And for some of them, that may be their only outlet in being able to speak to people. And there are consequences to that. In other words, he's weird. Don't get involved with him. Keep away. And gradually, that's a sort of forced isolation where the person is feeling worse because the only people that they, if you like, are able to associate with on a regular basis is at work. And then that forced sense of isolation becomes even more compounding, and they have to leave the job because it gradually gets to the point where they're feeling, I can't take this. And they end up in hospital, a breakdown. Who are they supposed to trust? I'll leave it there. It's just a thought.
No, thank you so much for saying that. And you're absolutely accurate. We talk about the roles of stigma and what stigma is for, like why stigma occurs. And we talk about in terms of it's about keeping people down and keeping people out. So keeping people out of places where they can have agency, but also keeping people down in terms of how they feel about themselves, and out in terms of that isolation. So that is what the role stigma has. You're absolutely right. And that experience of isolation and stigma, it just prevents that trust in organizations because once you've had a really negative experience with stigma and discrimination, there is that assumption that, well, that's what I'm going to continue experience. We talked about that anticipation that people spoke about in the study. And you have to operate as an employer assuming that people have had stigmatizing experiences in the past and that you're operating from that level of there is not trust there. So, how am I going to build trust? How am I going to ensure that they know they will be supported? They know this is a safe space for them and operate from that basis rather than assuming that everyone will have had the trust and have the experiences that they should like need to have had to feel confident speaking about their mental health. So thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
So, in terms of reducing the stigma, we talk about these kind of cogs that need to happen to reduce stigma. So, we talk about, like you were saying there, Charlene, about the knowledge. So, knowledge and upskilling and training around about mental health is really crucial. Using inclusive language is very crucial as well. But also leadership. We need leaders to be on board and supportive of employing people with a history of mental illness and having a process in terms of recruitment and induction that really supports people being able to talk about what they need from day one rather than at a crisis point. So, having that leadership that promote an inclusive culture, having targeted social media marketing and policies and practices that really emphasize that your organization is safe for people with mental illness and that you have a robust support policy, but that it's also fine for people to speak about what they need in work and there's not going to be negative consequences. I think we've had some comments in the chat about kind of the negative consequences people have had when they have spoke about their mental health. We want to move away from that and create an environment where people can get what they need. In the same way that if someone broke their pelvis and had said, my mum broke her pelvis and was in a wheelchair for 6 months, but if someone had that experience and then all of a sudden their workplace would be like, okay, well, what can we do to support? What do you need to make sure that you can still do your job? Like, what time off do you need? That would be what the conversation would be. But when we talk about mental illness, that conversation all of a sudden becomes quite taboo or uncomfortable for people in a way that physical ailment does not. So I think it's about getting to the place where there is equitable treatment for physical health and mental health, and people feel equally as comfortable having those conversations. And all of the work that you do around mental illness within your organization should be informed by lived experience, whether that be lived experience of people within the organization or reaching out to charities like ourselves, like Sam H, like Change Mental Health, like Vox, who have lived experience of people who have experienced mental illness and asking, well, what would they recommend? What would they want in an ideal world? What would they want from an employer? utilize those services that are available to you to ensure that what you're doing is informed by lived experience and be part of that movement where you're not an employer who stigmatizes it, because that's being part of a social movement. The more people who are informed, the more people who don't use stigmatizing language, the more power we have as a collective to challenge it. So that's all been a lot of me talking. I'll come back to the skip, but we've got one of our. I've got some comments in the chat, and we've also got. Like my dog said, that's fine. You're expected to be able to manage your mental health. It's viewed very differently to physical health. Exactly. And there's all this stigma attached with if you go off for a cold, then no, or if you go off for a week with COVID or the flu, no one says anything. But if you're like, oh, I'm going off for a week because I just need a break because my anxiety is really bad, or because I just need some recovery time, the reactions that you get from people are quite different. And it shouldn't be. It shouldn't be different. People's minds, in the same way as our bodies, need recovery time. They need looked after. We need to have things that look after our physical health, that as well as look after our mental health. We need to really practice viewing mental health in the same way that we view physical health. And this stigma occurs at all different levels. So it occurs at the kind of structural level, cultural level, institutional level, and personal level. As an individual, you have the power to control what happens at a personal level, how you speak about mental health, what you do in terms of your language, what conversations you have around with the people around you. And to some degree, depending on where you are in your organization, you have the power to change it on an institutional level as well. So looking at your policies, your practices, what barriers are in place for people disclosing, and thinking about what can be changed to improve that process. Paul, you've got your hand up. Was that a legacy hand from last time, or is it a new thought?
Oh, it's a new one. Can I ask, does CME ever have events where they'll have perhaps maybe 70, 80 people all arranged at the same location and an open discussion about these things?
Yes, we recently had our conference, our anti-stigma conference, around about in October, the start of October, and we will be hosting further events. Primarily, our events are online because we're a national organisation. So just for accessibility of people who are nationally in terms of the Highlands and Islands and all of those sorts of things. But we do some events within the central belt where we're located for kind of gathering together as well.
My reasons for asking is because what you've described there about the different problems that people have, some kind of drama. If there was some type of drama at one of your events to say, well, this is how people struggle in the working environment. For example, just going into work for the first time, it's a new job, you're afraid of how people are going to respond. You're perhaps questioning whether you should actually discuss with your supervisor that you have mental or emotional problems due to it. And I think a drama sometimes can put across a hell of a lot more than perhaps just the discussions. Discussions are very good. They help people, expand their understanding and how things are. But sometimes a drama tends to have, I would say, more of an impact that people can physically see something happening. There it is. I'm struggling with this. What do I do? The person leaves the room, and then you have the back chat behind it. We don't want to employ him because he's got this or that, but don't tell him that's the reason. You
Yeah.
know, things like that. It's just a suggestion because there is a YouTube video about a group of survivors of trauma who put forward their personal experiences in front of an audience, and Police Scotland were involved in that, and they were very helpful. And when you looked at the audience while the drama was in progress, their chins were hitting the floor. We don't talk about that kind of thing. We don't do this. But the whole point is that's why the problems are still there, because nobody wants to address them. So the drama worked in that context. When the drama was finished, there was an uproar of, congratulations and so on and so on. And the drama achieved its objective because people were then coming forward saying, I need help. I'll leave it there. Just a thought.
Thank you so much for that feedback. And yeah, absolutely. I think a drama would be great. We've tried to do that with some of our videos of like having real life examples. I think having that in person kind of enactment of what people experience would be really, really beneficial. So thank you so much for that suggestion. And when we're planning future events, I'll make sure to kind of embed that into it as well. So thank you so much. I agree with Keely. It really helps with building that empathy. Um, So I've spoke a lot and I want to really kind of highlight the lived experience and how workplaces can be supportive from someone who's been really well supported within their workplace and has an experience where they felt really valued. We have our amazing volunteer here, Gary, Gary Gilfillan. But Gary is absolutely fantastic. He's been a CME volunteer for a very long time, and he's going to share a bit about his experience within the workplace, give you some context about what you experienced, Gary, and how you were really well supported, how your workplace created an environment where you could speak about your mental health and you didn't face that stigma. So I'll pass over to Gary and then I'll come back to the resources after Gary's had his input. So, a welcome to Gary and thank you so much for joining us here today.
Thanks, Brian. Can you see and hear me okay?
I can see and hear you. Yep, thanks, Gary.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Gary. I'm a CME volunteer, and I'm absolutely delighted and buzzing to be here this morning to speak about something that's really close to my heart, guys, and that's mental health. So what I've been asked to talk about this morning is why organisations should prioritise an anti-stigma approach and why it's important to create an environment where people can speak openly and get help. In particular, I've been asked to touch on what made me feel comfortable and have trust in my organisation to support my mental health, and what did my organisation do that made me feel honest with them and stuff like that. So, first thing I want to do is I want to thank each and every one of you for being here today. It's great to have you in the audience. I know there's 73 sign-ups, so thanks very much for the vote in my heart for being here. Now, in order to answer these questions, guys, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you all on a very personal journey today, if you permit me to do that, please, and explain how, over a 20-year period at work, I was treated and how I came through adversity. So in order to do that, I'll take you on a journey. So sit yourself down, buckle yourself in, let's go on a journey. So growing up, I had no mental health issues or symptoms whatsoever. I was a really keen athlete. I did well at school. And when I was 17, I joined the police cadets. And I'll give you a fun fact as well, guys. When I was 17, I was an under 18 British professional sprint champion. I joined the police service at the age of 18 and a half. And at the training college, there's a reason for me telling you this, and I'll come back to it later. But at the training college in Tullyallen in Kincardine, as a probationary officer, I was given an award called the Baton of Honour. Now, that's reserved for the most outstanding student on the course. And I'm not telling you that to show off. I'm going to come back to that later on in my presentation, guys. So, when I was 18 and a half, joined the police service, like I said, and when I was 27, with 9 years police service, I was in a specialised role. I was in the criminal investigation department. I had a beautiful wife, a new house, and a new car, and life was great. Now, unfortunately, at the age of 27, so going back 24 years, I'm giving you my age there, guys. At the age of 27, something tragic happened in my personal life, very tragic, and it happened at 5 o'clock on a Sunday morning. When I got home from the hospital that day, I never ate properly, I never slept, and I ended up going back to work at 8 o'clock the next morning. I shouldn't have been anywhere near my work. And my bosses were really supportive. We're sorry what happened, Gary. We're sorry to see you here. If you need to go home and take time out, then you're welcome to do that. So I had the initial support from work in that respect. But for the next 4 weeks, I worked long hours on a major inquiry. And I was working 12 to 14-hour shifts. And my bosses at work were asking me to slow down and take some time out. They were very supportive, but I never listened. And I should have listened, guys, because at the end of the 4 weeks, I suffered a nervous breakdown and I was signed off work for 6 weeks with post-traumatic stress. In that 6 week period, I had good support for the police. I had visits from a force welfare officer. I had visits from a first line manager. But at the end of that 6 weeks, guys, my mental health took a dip for the worst. And it was off the scale. I don't know if you've seen that film with Russell Crowe called A Beautiful Mind. That's exactly what it was like. So my mental health was so bad, I had to be sectioned under the Mental Health Act and locked up in a psychiatric hospital for 4 months. Now, when I was in there, I'm going to tell you a quick story just to illustrate my mind at the time. I'd been in there for a week or two. I have no recollection of this. It's my wife that tells me the story. And I phoned her up one day and I went, "Hello, it's me. You can't come in today. I've killed everybody." And I put the phone down and she's thinking, "Oh my God." So she phoned the staff at the hospital and says, I've just had a troubled phone call from my husband. And they were like, yeah, he's had a bit of a difficult night. And the rest of the patients, how are they? They're absolutely fine. So for the record, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't murder anyone. At the end of that 2 weeks, my wife was taken to one side and she was told that I would never work again and we would never have a family. Now, for the next 3 months in that hospital, my wife visited me for 6 hours a day. I'll come back to your question at the end, Keely. So, no, you're fine. Don't apologise. So, at the end of it, during that 3.5 months I was in there, my wife visited me at the hospital for 6 hours a day, every day. For 4 months I was in there. The love and support I got for her was unconditional. Unknown to me, because I was so unwell, when she was going home in the evening, she was getting phone calls from my work, asking how I was doing, how I was keeping, asking how Fiona was doing, my wife, and stuff like that. So the work were involved heavily for the onset. Now, when I've been in there for 3.5 months, my wife was very supportive during that time, as I said. And one of my bosses phoned her up and says, right, Gary's been in hospital for 3.5 months. When can we go and visit him? And my wife was like, I'm really sorry, Gary's not well enough for visitors at the moment. So my boss was like, well, if we can't help Gary, how can we help you? Because you're away visiting him every day. And my wife said, there's nothing you can do to help me. And my boss says, well, if you leave your lawnmower out, I'll cut your grass for you. If you need groceries from the grocery store, leave a list on your doorstep and I'll go to the grocery store for you. That was the level of support that I had for work at that particular time. Having been in hospital for 4 months, I was then released from section and allowed home. And the transition between home life and hospital life was massive because I felt I became institutionalized in there. So the transition period into getting home, going to bed at night, having a shower, eating and drinking and stuff like that was very difficult for me. But during that period, I was off for another 6 months. So during the 6 months I was off, I had visits from my supervisor, work colleagues, the force welfare officer, and one of my bosses came to visit me the first time, and we just had a coffee in the house. And then the next 2 weeks later, my boss visited me again, and he's like, right, Gary, we're going out for a walk today. And I'm like, we can't go out for a walk, I'm all sick. I can't be seen to be out and about. And he's like, Gary, trust me, you're with me, we're going for a walk. And that's what we did. 2 weeks later, the same supervisor came back, right, Gary, I'm taking you out for a coffee today. And I'm thinking, oh my God, I can't leave the house. I can't go for a coffee. And he's like, you're with me, trust me. And we went for a coffee. A couple of weeks later, one of my colleagues for the CID, he visited me and he says, right, Gary, I know you used to go to the gym before you went into the hospital. We're going to the gym today. And I was like, can I go to the gym? I can't be off work and going to the gym. But we did. And it just worked for me. The force welfare officer came on board, and essentially that person was kind of like a psychologist, if you like. He would sit and chat to me, and we would chat through all our issues and difficulties and what I'd been through in my life and stuff like that. And I found it quite therapeutic. So not only did I have amazing support from my first line manager and my colleagues, I had a force welfare officer on board as well. Obviously, I had like the usual stuff like your psychiatrists, psychologists, community support nurses, and stuff like that. So I'm being off work for that 6 weeks. I have to say, I did have trust in the organisation right from the start, and this is going back 24 years. So after being off work for 6 months, I was ready to dip my toe in water and get back to work. And I meant to say earlier, guys, I'm just jumping about here. Sorry for that. My condition is called schizoaffective disorder, and it's a mixture of schizophrenia and bipolar. And the symptoms is like stress, depression, anxiety, paranoia, voices in my head, all that stuff. And I still live with that to this very day. So, like I say, during that time, I also lost my driving license because of my mental health, so I couldn't drive. Now, having been off for that 6 months, I then was ready to go back to work. So one of my supervisors phoned up and said, right, Gary, I believe you're ready to go back to work. And I'm like, yes. And he's like, I think the first thing we should consider seriously here is a phased return, if you're okay with that. And I was like, yeah, phased return would be fine. That would suit me. What hours do you want me to work? And he's like, you can work whatever hours suit you best. And I was like, right. And then he said, do you take medication? I was like, yes. Does it make you drowsy? Yes. When does it make you drowsy? I says, in the morning. He says, well, don't come in too early then. He says, "I also believe you've lost your license. Is that right?" I says, "Yes." He says, "Well, we're going to station you in your hometown so you can walk to your work, if that's okay with you." So that was the level of interaction I had with the police, having been off work for 12 months in total, to come back into that working environment, guys. And I just felt supported and valued. And by the way, I actually just went to work and worked 10 till 2, Monday, Wednesday, Friday for the first couple of weeks to get me back into that working environment. When I was in there, one of my line managers had me in his office every day that I was in for 15 minutes for a coffee. And he would say things like, "Gary, sorry, my daughter just came in the room. Just a moment. Right, I'm just losing my track of thought. Give me a second. My daughter just popped into the room there. So yeah, he had me in his office every day, and he was like, "Gary, how are you keeping? How are you settling in? How's the family? How can we support you?" and stuff like that. So the level of support I had for line management was brilliant, and that continued for the next 3 months when I was in that role. For the first couple of weeks, it was just reading emails and catching up with what had been going on in the 12 months I'd been away, and then I was given an admin role for a while. Did that for 3 months. Then I was moved to another role, office manager in the CID, take care of all the CID's admin. I did that for 3 months. And I just felt welcomed and valued at work, and looked after, if that makes sense. So, having done these two jobs for 3 months each, I then got my driving license back. And by this time, I was up to working full-time hours. A job vacancy came up at a place called Crime Desk. Now, Crime Desk is where it's a substantive role for a start. So I was delighted to be offered a substantive post because it made me feel welcome, valued, all the rest of it. So Crime Desk for me worked really well. You're taking reports of low-level criminality over the phone. You're checking undetected police reports to make sure all lines of investigation have been followed. There's a bit of admin to it. You go to meetings. And it just like gave me a sense of worth. And I didn't work night shifts because of my medication, so I worked day shift and back shifts in that environment. And I did that for 2 to 3 years. When I was in that post for 2 to 3 years, I was seeing my line manager every 1 to 2 weeks. He would have me in his office. How are you settling in? How are you keeping? How's the family? And that was the level of care and support I had when I was in that role at Crime Desk, and it just worked for me personally. So, having done that for 2 or 3 years, the officers in charge of me decided that the time had come for me to go to another role, if I was agreeable to it. And they had me in their office and says, "Right, Gary, you've been in this job for, I think it was 3 years actually," and said, "There's a job come up in the intelligence world as an intelligence officer, and we think you'd be suited to that with your background. How do you feel about that?" And I was like, "That would be great." So I got a job in the intelligence world, and I did that for a while. Did that for a number of years because once I got into that department, there was different roles I could do in that department, if that makes sense. And it just ticked the boxes for me. And again, I had line management support throughout that, where they were getting me in their office, sitting me down, closing the door. How are you doing? How are you settling in? How are you coping? And sometimes I had worries about paranoia about some of the work I was doing, that I was maybe not doing it right and stuff like that. But they were never they never criticised me. They just supported me, if that makes sense. Now, the next story I'm going to tell you is quite important, and I only found out about it after it had happened. But a job came up in the Public Protection Unit as a case coordinator. And basically, you're checking police systems and you're identifying children at risk. But before I was actually approached about that job, there was a meeting held to discuss my mental health, which was pretty cool. And I didn't know about this meeting. It was before I was even asked about the job in the first place. I wanted to discuss if I would be capable of doing it. So there was a psychiatrist, a psychologist, a police doctor. There was a first line manager, which was a sergeant. Then there was a second line manager, which was an inspector. And the psychiatrist took the lead, and he says, "Right, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to take the lead today." And he looked at the two police officers, my sergeant and inspector, and says, "What do you know about mental health?" And they're like, "We don't know anything much about mental health. Bear in mind, you're going back 24 years, guys." He says, "Right, I'm going to educate you on mental health on a scale of 1 to 12. 1 being the least obtrusive and 12 being the most obtrusive. Is that okay?" Yeah, that's fine. So he goes, 1, mild anxiety, 2, mild depression. He gets all the way up to 10 and he stops at 10 and he went, are you with me so far? And they went, yes. Any questions? And my mate Jim says, so where was Gary on that scale? And he went, Gary, we've not even reached Gary yet, which we thought was quite funny. So they had that meeting for the next hour, talking about me, my mental health, my conditions and stuff like that. And they decided that I'd be a good candidate for that role. And they offered me that job and I took it. And I was delighted that I took it because I worked in there for a period of time and it just ticked the boxes. It was another good role, great support from line management. I was writing reports, and by the end of working there, they didn't even need to check the reports because the standard was pretty high, so that was pretty cool. But they would have me in their office every week. Again, how's the family, how you settling in? And I just felt valued by the police as an organisation at that point. Now, moving on from there, from that role, I then went back into the world of intelligence. And then with 25 years service, so I still had 5 years to go in the police, which is a long time. The one job I'd always wanted to do was go back to the police college that I got that award that I was telling you earlier and teach. But with my mental health, I never thought for a minute it would be on the cards. I was worried, I was stressed, I was thinking about it, and I thought, you know what, this might be too big a jump for me. I just don't know if I can cope with it. But anyway, long story short, I phoned up one of my friends who was a boss at the police college, and I explained to him, look, I'm wondering if I could cope with a job at the college, and I've no idea if I could. But can you tell me a bit more about it? And he says to me, why don't you come for a week's secondment, Gary, and see how it's run? And then you can decide at the end of that week if it's for you or not. And you can sit in on classes, you can watch them getting taught, you can see what's involved. He says, who's your line manager? So I told him, he says, right, leave it with me. So 10 minutes later, my line manager gets me in and says, I've just had a phone call for Chris. I believe you're looking for a week at the college. And I was like, yeah, if that's possible. He went, possible? He went, of course it is. I'll support you 100% for that. I think you'd be great at that job. So I went to the police college on a secondment for a week. And guys, I'm not kidding you, it turned out to be one of the best weeks in my entire service. And at the end of that week, I ended up getting up and talking in front of a class for half an hour as well. And I just came home that night and I was buzzing. And my wife was like, you've had the best week ever. And I'm like, yes, I have. And then she says, what are you going to do if a job comes up? Are you going to apply? And I'm thinking, I don't think I could cope with a job there, Fiona. I was like, I think it's going to be too much. And she went, well, you'll never know till you try. So I was working on Hogmanay in 2016. And one of my colleagues was on her break looking at stuff on the computer, and she was like, oh, there's a job here, there's a job there. And she went, oh, here's the job at the police college as an instructor. And I'm like, what? She went, the closing date's the 7th of January. So guess how I spent my New Year, guys? So I get home that night, and the first thing I says to my wife is, the job comes at the college, and she's like, you're going to hate to apply, Gary. And I'm like, but I'll be away Monday to Friday, blah, blah, blah. And she said, it doesn't matter. It's your dream job. I'll support you. I'd love you to apply. So I then went to work the next day and spoke to my bosses at work, and they're like, Gary, we'll support you 100%. What is it you need to do? I said, I have to put a written application in. He went, right, you put your written application in and we'll endorse it and we'll support you. And I did. I put a written application in. I got through that. Then I got an interview. It was an hour interview. And these people didn't know me or my history. They just knew me for being Gary Gilfillan. So I rocks up at the interview. That lasted an hour, like I said. And ladies and gentlemen, at the end of that, I got a job at the police college as an instructor. And it's one of my proudest achievements in my service, given my mental health symptoms and situation. So I started work at the police college in November 2017. And I did that role for 3 years. And it was the best 3 years of my service. But I did have blips along the way. And I'm going to describe to you now what my blips were, how the police treated me, and how I felt and how I had trust in the organisation, because that's the key elements that we're here to discuss today. Sorry if I went on a bit about my personal stuff. It's just to give you a flavour of what I've been through. So I've been working at the police college for 6 months, and I was having a bad day. I'd been teaching in the morning, I was teaching in the afternoon, and I had voices in my head. I just wanted to burst into tears, and I just couldn't cope. And I remember walking up the stairs to my sergeant's office thinking to myself, my days at the police college are going to be over now. And I walked into his office, sat down, and burst into a flood of tears right away. And he was like, right, give me a second. So the first thing I did was close the door, put the door at the stop sign on, sits me down and says, right, Gary, talk to me. And I'm like, I just can't cope. I can't cope. I've got voices in my head. I just want to cry. I just don't know what to do. And he's like, right, give me a minute. So he gave me a minute, or I gave him a minute. He gave me a minute, and he said to me, what I'm going to do, Gary, is I'm going to give you three options, and I won't be offended by which one you take. He says, the first option is go home and spend time with your family, and I'll think no less of you. Then he said to me, what are you due to teach tomorrow? I says, I'm in class in the morning. I've got a 1.5 hour lecture on hate crime, then I've got a 1.5 hour lecture on vandalism. And he's like, right, okay. Well, what I can do is I can go and study the lesson notes tonight, and I'll go and take the lead tomorrow, and you could sit in the back of the class. That's another option for you. I'll study the notes, I'll go into class and I'll teach. That's another option. I was like, right. He said, the third option is you go in and teach, but I'll sit in the back of the class and I'll be ready to take over at any particular point. You just say the word that I'm now passing over to my boss, and I'll stand up and take the rest of the class for you. So that was the level of support that I had for this supervisor. And you'll not be surprised to learn, guys, I decided to go back in and teach the next day. But the first thing he did in the morning was checked in with me at 8 o'clock. He's like, Gary, can I have a quick word? So I get in his office, he shuts the door, do not disturb sign on, sits me down and says to me, right, Gary, how are you feeling? And I'm like, I'm feeling all right, and I'm definitely up for this. And he went, that's great, I'll just sit in the back of the class. He says, but if at any point you're struggling, you just say the word and I'll come and take over. So I went into class, I taught my 1.5 hour lectures, and can we just say the sergeant didn't have to chip in at all? And it was brilliant. So that was one example. And he was full of praise for me when I came out of that room, having delivered 3 hours of teaching. 6 months later, I had another bad day. I'd been teaching in the morning, teaching in the afternoon. It got too much for me. Again, I'm thinking my days at the college will be over. So I walks up the stairs, goes into my sergeant's office. There's a different sergeant, this time a female. She was lovely. And she says, right, Gary, how you doing? And I just burst into tears again. So she closed the door, didn't stop sign on, sat me down. So yeah, it was interesting. And she says to me, right, Gary, how are you? And I just burst into tears, like I said. I says, I can't cope. I've got voices, I'm just want to cry all the time. I says, I can't cope with teaching a whole day. And then I says, I assume my days at teaching at the college are over. And she went, far from it. You're a valued member of staff. I'll support you. So what is your struggles? I went, I can't teach a whole day. She went, that's fine. When can you teach? I says, well, I prefer to teach in the morning than an afternoon. And she was in charge of the timetable folks. So she says, you know what, Gary, I'll timetable you to teach in the morning then. And in the afternoon, you can do light admin roles like checking notebooks, checking statements, checking police reports that the probationer has submitted. And that's what she did for me as well. I had another day, another example for you how the organisation treated me was I was walking through the corridor one day, and I always address people and speak to folk when I pass them. And apparently one day I just walked straight past two of my colleagues. I looked straight at them and walked on. I had no recollection of doing that. So they were a bit worried about me. I went and saw my first line manager and says, Gary's just walked past us and he doesn't look right. And he's ignored us and stuff. And the boss was like, it's not like Gary, I'll get him in for a chat. So he got me in for a welfare chat, sat me down and says, how are you doing today? And I was like, I'm struggling, I'm having a bad day. And he's like, I thought that because you walked past two of your colleagues and you never acknowledged them. And they were a bit worried about you. He says, what you got on this afternoon? I said, I'm just doing admin stuff. He says, right, do you want to go back to your room for a while and take some time out? I says, that would be perfect. I says, I'd like that. Right. He says, all right, go back to your room, take as long as you need. And once you're ready, come back up and just check in with me to make sure you're all right. And that's what he did. So that was another classic example of how to be treated by the organisation. Another one was where I had been working towards the end of a course. And at the end of the course, guys, when you're teaching at the college, you get to do what's called a tutorial, and people can ask you questions about every part of the legislation. And I kind of struggled with that. And I didn't want to admit it because I thought it would be a sign of weakness. But I couldn't go into the class and get asked hundreds of questions about everything and be able to answer them all. So because I was worried about that, I went and saw my line manager and says, look, I'm really sorry, but this is the situation here. I can't cope with all these questions at the end of a tutorial. And she says, Gary, don't apologise. If you're struggling, we'll just pair you up with somebody and the two of you can go in and do it together if that helps you. And I was like, that would be amazing. So I did that. So that was the level of support that I had from supervisors. As for work colleagues, I had great support for them as well, guys, to the point that it was quite humbling. So one of my mates, a really, really good friend of mine at the college, saw I was having a bad day. I was in teaching. I was halfway through a teach. So I was 45 minutes into a 1.5 hour input and I was having a bit of a stinker. So he knocks on the classroom door. He says, Constable Gilfillan, can I have a private word? So I went out in the corridor and he's like, you all right today? And I was like, nah, I'm struggling. He went, I knew it. He went, you didn't see yourself this morning. He says, so what are you teaching? So I told him. He went, right, I'm going to go in and take the rest of your class and you're going to go back to your room and take some time out if that suits you. And I says, that would just be amazing. And that's what we did. Another quick one as well, sorry to ramble on, was I was really open at work about my mental health. And I told my supervisors knew, and what a lot of my work colleagues knew, not all of them, because you know what it's like, you didn't tell everybody everything, but I had a good core network of colleagues that understood me. So they would come in the morning, Gary, morning, what you got on the day? So I would tell them, and they would turn around and say to me, remember, if you're teaching the day and anything gets too much for you, if anything gets too much for you today, then just say the word and I'll go and take your class for you. If there's anything you need help with, just say. So sometimes at night, if I was struggling, I was maybe studying something that I was teaching the next day and I didn't quite understand it, people would make time for me at night and they would sit with me and they explain the notes and stuff, and it just worked. So that there, ladies and gentlemen, is exactly why I personally had an amazing experience. And of course, it went to the point that I had total trust in the organisation at the end. Unfortunately, in 2020, my mental health dipped really badly and I was off work for 6 months. And at the end of that period, I ended up having to go through ill health retirement, which isn't what I wanted to do, but it was right for me. All right. So there's a few things that the police do to support people with mental health. And one of them is they have a police treatment centre where you go and there's a 2-week psychological and wellbeing programme there. And I've been twice on it and it's really, really good. You do mindfulness classes, you do sleeping classes, Tai Chi, Pilates, yoga, all that stuff. You get massages and stuff. It's a really, really good program that the organisation have. And what I would say is, having listened to these examples that I've just cited today, ladies and gentlemen, they're not too technical. Sometimes in life, it just comes down to basic human decency as well. And that's where we are with that. So, if anybody's got any questions that they want to ask away, I've got another couple of minutes to touch on one other thing that Brian asked me to touch on. But if anybody's got anything they want to say, just fire away.
Charlene's got a question.
Go for it.
Hi, Gary.
Hiya.
I'm Charlene. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Honestly, I actually feel quite emotional listening to that. So, as you're saying about your condition, I support people through the IPS SAMH employability programme who have the exact same condition as yours sometimes. So, I know the capabilities that people have got when it comes to working. So,
Yep.
I can understand the side, obviously, in the hospital, somebody's saying to you, you'll never work again.
I get that. I get why they said that because
Yeah,
I was.
I've heard that expression so many times working in my community mental health teams.
Aye.
And putting my own personal opinions aside, you go with obviously how people are at that stage in their life and things like that. But I'm always of the opinion that anybody can work, who experiences mental health difficulties with the right and correct support.
Yes.
So amazing that you're talking about the support that you've got, and it's just so brilliant to hear how wonderful the police were at supporting you.
Yes.
And also reminding us, like you're saying, like small reasonable adjustments,
Yes.
small things that don't cost a lot of money, that don't cost the employer a lot of time, a lot of effort, can make such a big difference to
Yes.
somebody who needs that extra support.
Sure.
So
Sure.
it's fantastic to hear that you managed to go back to something that you love, and you were saying obviously you were getting promoted and going to the teaching college and stuff. So you've came through a lot, but
Yeah.
honestly, you're such a truly amazing and inspiring individual, and you really need to take pride in that as well.
Much.
And your wife as well has obviously been such
Oh, she's been amazing.
an amazing support, and the fact you were told you would never have a family and you just said that your daughter popped in. So these are fantastic achievements, and it just shows you that no matter what people say, and obviously if your health is deteriorating, you know what to do,
Yes.
you know the signs, you know
Sure.
the triggers, and
Yeah.
you know how to reach out for support, and that's incredibly important for moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, so you really are truly an inspiration, and it's brilliant to hear how supportive the police have been as well. I mean, what a great organisation to hear. Like even as I say, the small things, the check-ins, they doing what they did, and
Yes.
what they were doing as well is, if you probably noticed it back then, they were kind of saying to you, look, just because you're off sick, everybody assumes you can't do anything,
Aye.
but you
Exactly.
can, and
Yeah.
it's so good for your mental health and your well-being to go out for a coffee, to
I know.
chat, to
Correct.
talk about things that aren't related to your mental health or just about you as a person.
Sure.
So fantastic. Well done. Well
Thank
done.
you.
Thank you so much for that, Charlene.
Right. Well,
Um,
I'll continue for a moment. I'll finish off.
Yeah, I was just going to highlight, just to kind of finish that thought, is that obviously when organizations are really big, they can offer quite a large degree of support or have really big budgets. But the things that Gary, you were saying were most impactful for you were things that people can do for free. So just really emphasizing that it's great having like specific programs and all that kind of stuff, but like that those check-ins, those like phone in and making sure that your family were all right, you like your check-ins in the morning, like all that kind of stuff, that's like stuff that can be done in any setting. And I think it's really important for you to recognize like the people that are here, no matter what size of employer you are, there are things that you can do. And all of our support is free. Loads of mental health charities offer free training. So just I know that especially in this current climate, how tight budgets are in terms of investing in mental health. But there's loads of things that people can do, and it's that empathy and it's that checking in and really showing your employees that they're valued that can have a really big impact on them. But yeah, Gary, do you want to finish your
Yeah.
point, and then I'll kind of
Yeah.
highlight some resources we've got to support with next steps.
Yep, yep. So just a couple of things to touch on. Paul, you were talking earlier, and you hit the nail on the head, Paul, when you said about fears about going into an environment that is not the norm. And when I started work at the police college, I was absolutely bricking it, and it did take me a while to settle in. So I take your point on board about that. And just to close off, folks, a couple of things. Brian asked me to touch on why do I feel it's important that workplaces focus on mental health, stigma, and culture. So we need to move on to statements like, if you can't come back to your own job, then come back, or you're a problem for me, what are we going to do with you now? And then obviously the derogatory language that we've heard in the past that Brian illustrated in her input as well. But obviously there's a need to have this supportive and understanding culture in the police, not in the police in any organisation, sorry, not to be judged, to move forwards and better educate people on mental health. Hopefully you can learn from the way that I was treated and show that yes, you can defy the odds. And just to say that yes, I was told I wouldn't work again, but I get that because I was really, really acutely unwell. Told I wouldn't have kids, and yes, you're right, I have got kids. I've actually got three, a son and two daughters, who I'm immensely proud of. And workplaces in particular need to create an environment where people can talk freely and honestly, and to alleviate fears that people have about losing a job or getting moved to a shift pattern that doesn't suit them and stuff like that. Everyone is always scared to change, especially when it comes to disclosing mental health. So that's me done. Just to close off, thanks very much for listening, guys. It's been a pleasure. And we do this kind of service then. This Brian and I do a lived experience service for people. So if you're needing that in your organisation, I know Charlotte or said you're from Sam H. If you need me to speak to Sam H and do a presentation, I'm up for that. So if you need anything, just reach out to Brian and she'll contact me. But honestly, guys, thanks to the bottom of my heart for listening to me today. And you take care of yourselves and enjoy the rest of the input. Cheers.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you so much for that. Just based on time, I will kind of run through the rest of the presentation and things I wanted to highlight to you. But I'll stay on a wee bit at the end as well for any questions that people have. But I just really wanted to highlight, well, what can we do now? So we highlight to workplaces, what can you do? And we have a 7-step strategy, but the different things that need to be in place for you to have a stigma-free environment. And that's things like senior leadership, thinking about your disclosure process and the privacy around that, having good mental health awareness and literacy, having confident line managers that don't feel uncomfortable speaking about mental health, and having really good understanding about what reasonable adjustments can be offered and what's reasonable for different roles, because what's reasonable for one role might not be reasonable for another role based on the remit of what that person is doing. So thinking about, well, what can be offered and exploring all possibilities. And think about the culture and ethos that you have as an organization. How open are you about speaking about mental health? And there's some things that we can do as an individual, but more often there's things that we can do as organizations. So for you as an individual, you can think about the language that you use around mental health. Like I said, lead with curiosity and challenge that stigmatizing language when you hear it, when it is safe to do so, and really having that kind of awareness of like, is this safe for me just now? Engaging content and media that's led by lived experience. So you've heard from Gary today, there's loads of stories out there, there's loads of videos, there's loads of content that really share people's lived experience about what they went through and what helped as well. So engage with that where you have capacity to do so, and ensure that informs the practice that you have within your organization, that it's not just a bunch of people who maybe haven't had that personal experience, but it's actually being informed by, we're going out, we're seeking that lived experience or guidance from organizations that work with people with lived experience as well. And model supportive conversations. So when you're having conversations about mental health, whether that be friends, family members, whether that be colleagues, model that supportiveness of giving them privacy, respecting their confidentiality, and not trying to immediately jump on solutions, but just listen and really provide that space for listening. And then as an organization, there's things that you can do. So providing training to people on mental health literacy, having dedicated time to discuss with managers in an organization how they manage conversations about mental health and reasonable adjustments, and provide training if that's an area that they actually identify as, I'm not comfortable, I don't feel confident, making sure that that is something that you identify. How do your managers feel about those conversations? And have proactive methods to support conversations about mental health. So, for example, SAMH have the wellness action plans. They are great. Everyone has them. So, for the point of induction, you have a wellness action plan that you're given dedicated time to think about, well, what are my trigger signs? What are signs that I'm struggling that people might pick up on? And what support is helpful for me when I'm struggling? So, utilizing tools like that are free to access, are available, and that are universal. So not just putting it in place when someone's reached a crisis point, but for everyone as well. And to regularly review your practices and policies and work directly with mental health disability advocates and charities to ensure that you're getting that best practice from people that are working with people who experience mental illness day in and day out as well. And share lived experience widely within your organisation. And if you're not comfortable sharing your own lived experience, again, platforming resources and media that do share that lived experience. So in total, overall, organisations as a response, we need to take proactive approaches, not just reactive approaches when someone has reached a crisis point. We should be regularly speaking about mental health, not just in World Mental Health Day or Time to Talk Day, but throughout the year, through induction processes, at the point of recruitment, letting people know if they have a gap in their employment status for whatever reason, that's not going to be judged based on their capability. So thinking about all of those different aspects of your organization, both in terms of what you can control, but as the organization as a whole as well. And we do have loads of resources that can support. So we've got our See Me and Work program, which is a 4-step program that organizations can sign up to that talks you through getting that feedback from employees. So doing anonymous surveys, doing focus groups, finding out what are the challenges when it comes to disclosure and creating an environment around about mental health that is really supportive. So getting that data from them. And then finding out what do we do about that? So we support you to create an improvement plan based on our work with our volunteers and based on the work with organisations that we've done about what's worked, what's not worked. So we help you create that improvement plan and then evaluate the impact of what worked well, did it change anything, and what still needs to be areas for development. So that's our See Me in Work programme. I will send a link at the end, and it'll also be in our resources list that we sent out to all people who signed up. That if you are interested in finding out more, you want to have a chat with me about that programme, let me know, and it is free as well. There's a little video on YouTube, but you'll get these slides sent out that showcases more about what the See Me in Work programme is. And we have loads of case studies from employers about how it worked for them. So people that have gone through the See Me in Work programme around about, well, how did it make a difference in terms of leadership, those building blocks that we highlighted in terms of training, in terms of disclosure, what a difference that made for the organisation so that we can provide you with practical examples of what organisations have done and what impact did it have. And then lastly, we've also got e-learning. So if you're a line manager or you're anyone in an organisation and you want to do some e-learning, again, it's all accessible, it's all free. We've got courses on having conversations about reasonable adjustments, having discussions about mental health in the workplace. And we also have our It's Okay to Talk cards as well. So we've got these little pink cards that have guidance on how do you have a supportive conversation around mental health. That can then be used or kept in your desk or kept around the office as a reminder of, well, what does a supportive conversation look like? So there's loads and loads of things out there on the website, and also resources from SAMH, Change Mental Health, our partner organisations as well, like Vox. Just utilise what's available if you're looking at mental health strategies. But as I said, my role is supporting organisations through See Me in Work. So if you want to have a chat about what you can do and how you can use the resources, I'm happy to have that chat. And that was kind of an overview of the resources. I totally rushed through that last bit because I was worried about running out of time. But actually, we managed to make it within that time. But I just wanted to highlight one, thank you all for coming to the session in the first place and engaging with Anti-Stigma and Anti-Stigma approach. But really think about where stigma has a role in your organisation and have a look at your mental health action plan or your mental health strategy plan if your organisation have one. And if you don't have one, think about making one, about what improvements can we make. But if you have one, look at, is stigma mentioned there? Is discrimination mentioned there at all? And if it's not, like, how can you take some of these steps? How can you take a focus on disclosure? How can you take a focus on leadership or training to really improve those outcomes for people and normalize conversations about mental health in the same way that we would about physical health? So it's really, really important that we get to that place where conversations about mental health feel as comfortable as physical health. So that is everything that I kind of wanted to share today. We do have a resources links in the chat to the requesting resources for workplaces and the See Me in Work. We've also got my email in there as well, which I'll pop into the chat, seemeworkplace@seemescotland.org. So if you want to get in touch with me to have a further chat, then let me know. But we do have 6 minutes left, and Paul, I can see your hands up. So we will now open up the last kind of 5-6 minutes for questions. And as Anna just highlighted as well, we do have more anti-stigma sessions coming up. So we've got one on Monday, the 8th of December, that's focused on anti-stigma, stigma in mental health nursing and what mental health nurses experience in terms of stigma. So there's a link to register there as well if you're interested in that topic around stigma and mental health nursing. We've got 6 minutes, so I'll go to Paul first, and then if there's any questions, let me know. I'll look back through the chat as well, but I can see lots of thanks, so thank you all there. But Paul, I'll come to you.
Hi, Gary. It's too bad I can't be there to shake your hand.
Thank you.
Outstanding, honestly. But you've just proved that if you're given the right support, a person can make progress.
Yeah.
That's the whole point, you know.
Yeah,
now,
definitely.
Baronet, I'm going to make a joke about my mental health, okay? And I can laugh at it now. And that was thanks to a counsellor. I have complex post-traumatic stress disorder. I have misophonia, which is a hatred of noise and repetitious movement. I have borderline personality disorder. I have insomnia sometimes. Apart from that, I'm fine. Okay.
Yeah,
But
thanks.
now, my point about Gary, going through all that process, listening to it in chronological order, I was able to have a petition at the Scottish Parliament because the charity that supported me then was Wellbeing Scotland, formerly known as Open Secret. Now, if it wasn't for them, I couldn't have done that petition. There was people there for me. Now, on Tuesday of this week, I had a trigger because people needed to access my home. I don't allow men in my home whom I don't know because I was physically assaulted. But we have a fantastic arrangement with the housing authority. I hand them the key. The maintenance staff come here. When it's finished, the key goes through the door and I get the key back later. But I had a trigger and I couldn't come home. So I went to the library and I was close to tears. And one of the staff, I said, look, I'm very uncomfortable just now. And she was very helpful. But that's the whole point. And as Gary outlined in his personal experience, people will make progress if they're given the right support. And that's what's paramount. Gary, thanks very much indeed. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Paul. You take care of yourself, mate.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that as well, Paul. I really appreciate that sharing of personal experience as well. So thank you. Yeah, if anyone has any questions about anything that's been covered, feel free to ask them. I've got the chat open as well. But I just wanted to say, thank you so much. And it's really important that stigma keeps on our mind, that we're not just forgetting about it, or we're thinking, okay, we've done this session and then we're going away and being like, oh, I'll come back to that in 6 months or however long it be. Really go away and think about what can we do, what changes, even if it's a change of I'm going to go check on my colleagues, or if you're a line manager, I'm going to put in dedicated time for my team to chat about how can we make a better environment where people can speak about mental health. Even if it's a 10-15 minute chat, whatever you do going forward from today will make a difference. And even if that's just celebrating Time to Talk Day, which is coming up in February, or starting that conversation, it all makes a difference. Even one action makes a big difference. So going forward from today, and if you're not sure what action to take, or if you're struggling for ideas, again, please email me. Happy to help. So thank you so much for that. You will get an evaluation link sent out in the follow-up email along with the slides. So feel free to fill that out then. We'd love to hear your feedback to make sure that we can make these sessions as useful for you as possible. So you'll get that in the follow-up email as well. And great to see that you're booked for the 8th around about mental health nursing, Clara. That's amazing. But I'll hold on for the next 2-3 minutes in case there's any questions. And if there's not, then you're free to go and enjoy the rest of your days and get those 2 minutes back. But thank you so much for attending today.